Chapter 4, S-curves and the apex. The term apex was used by Governor Cuomo last spring in mid to late March, beginning of April, when we were in the throes of COVID-19 spread. And this basic graph illustrates this principle. We have altogether, we're going to start with one infection at time t equals 0, and then at time t equals 5 days we have 2 infections, 10 days we have 3 infections, etc., and it goes 3, 5, 8, 13, 18, 21, all the way down. And we can plot the curve. This nice S curve here includes all these data points, and altogether at t equals 50 days we have 25 infections. We can also make a plot of new infections. We have 1 infection times 0. We can call that 1 new infection. And we go from 1 to 2, so we have 1 new infections. 2 to 3, we have 1. 3 to 5, we have 2. 5 to 8, we have 3, all the way down. It goes 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 5, 3, 2, 1, 1. And if we plot that, we can use square data points. We have this lower curve. And that's new infections as a function of time. These 2 data points here, where we have 5 new infections, that's at the peak of the curve. We call that the apex. One of the goals last spring was to get past the apex. And what's happening is we reach a peak infection rate, not a peak number of infections, but a peak infection rate, where we're adding 5 a day here. Once we get past that, we've slowed down the progression of the disease. And so that was one of the public goals that the public health officials were talking about, passing the apex. We also wanted to flatten the curve. If this was 330 million people and we passed the apex on the way to 330 million infections, that would have been no milestone. It just would have meant that we ran out of people to infect, not that we defeated the disease. So they talked about flattening the curve, wanted to lower this down to a few million versus 330 million. One figure that was thrown out in the spring was we could see 160 million to 240 million infections, and that was the basic parameters of COVID that we'll talk about in the coming chapters made that a possibility. Of course, we social distance, and possibly COVID wasn't quite as serious as we thought. So those two facts prohibited us from having 160 to 240 million infections. So we flattened the curve, and also we did have an apex of sorts in the spring. And now that it's fall, winter of 2020, 2021, of course, it's picking up again. This point right here, there's actually multiple points here, I guess, is what's called an inflection point. And what happens is this part of the curve down here, it's concave up. There's a concave side and a convex side to the curve. The concave side is up, and then down here, it's concave down. And where the concavity changes, that's what's called an inflection point. It's a calculus term, and if you take calculus 1 and 2, you'll see that. This is pretty important. That's a changing point. We went from the rate of change increasing to the rate of change decreasing. Pretty important in areas outside of this. Big in marketing. Okay, if this is market saturation right here, down here is where all the raging growth is. And here we're reaching market saturation. And once we pass the inflection point, you can't make 10, 20, 30% per year by buying a stock. Okay, you want to invest down here if you want to make a killing. So, okay, that's all for this video. It's fairly straightforward, but worth explaining.